Hello and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today on Friday, January 20th. It's also a great pleasure to be joined today by three folks from, right next door. Bennington-Rutland Supervisory Union is here to tell us a little bit about the budgets that are going to be approved or not by you voters in town meeting. The Bennington-Rutland Supervisory Union and the Taconic and Green will be submitting some budgets for you all to have a look at, and here to tell us more about what's in those budgets and some of the educational issues that are driving those. We're very pleased to be joined today by Dr. Randi Lowe, who is the Bennington-Rutland Supervisory Union Superintendent. Sue Wilborn is the Director of Finance and Business Operations, and Jim Salsgiver is the Chairman of the Bennington-Rutland Supervisory Union Board and also a member of the Taconic and Green School Board. So folks, thanks you all very much for being with us today. Really appreciate you making the time to walk us through the budgets and a few other issues we'll have a chance to talk about. And I guess to get us started, Dr. Lowe, tell us a little bit about sort of I guess you could say the big picture that's in these, represented in the budgets. What's going on in the budgets, what's changing, what's new, what budget voters know about?
Sure, well, thanks for having us. And we appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk to you and everybody else about the budgets that we are putting forth to the voters at the beginning of March. So we have a lot of pieces of information, new programs and staffing and positions and things that we've included in the budget this year. So there is an increase to our ed spending, which is, I would say, probably going to happen in just about every district across the state. There are a lot of cost increases due to inflation, gas, food, what else? Heating.
Fuel, yeah.
Yeah, fuel costs are pretty high. Yeah. Our health insurance costs are up 12%. We've got salary increases. From the BRSU budget, we have pretty significant increases in special education costs, particularly for students who are at grades that we don't serve in our schools. We saw a pretty significant increase. So all of those are increases to the general budget, not additions, not changes, not positions, not changes to programming, but just increased costs that we have. I would say that there's probably two primary areas where there were very intentional decisions to make changes and adjustments to the budget, personnel primarily. First one is when the Taconic and Green district formed, we had many school districts that came together. And each of the schools, the 5 Taconic and Green schools, and 6 including Meadowee, so the 6 BRSU schools had different staffing funded by different sources, and we had not gone through since the merger and calibrated our academic intervention services and social emotional support services for students. So we spent a lot of time prior to budget season reviewing all of the academic interventions, and so those are folks who provide additional instructional services, reading, writing, math, for students who need some additional services and support in addition to what they get with their classroom teacher. Like they're struggling to learn a concept, or they might be slightly below their peers and they need some additional instruction. So what we did is we calibrated across the SU and said, okay, from our local budget, we are going to equitably staff from our local budget. So every single school has approximately the same student staff ratio from the local budget. And then we have grant funds, Title I funds in particular, CFP, Consolidated Federal Programs, federal funds that are designed to provide some additional instructional support for schools that have a higher number of students who qualify for free and reduced lunch. So then we have some additional staff on top of the locally funded positions. We have some additional staff. So what we've done in this budget is made sure that you see some changes in staffing, some increases in order to make sure that we are locally funding everybody the same. We did the same for our social emotional support. We have our kids post-pandemic do have greater, more complex social and emotional needs, and so we want to make sure that we are staffing our schools in a way that will support the needs of our students. So we now have equitable staffing across all 6 of the BRSU schools. So there's some changes in the budget reflecting that. As probably a lot of people know, we happen to live in a place where there are not a lot of housing, and so we have a hard time recruiting people to come and work in our community. They can't find a place to live when they come. We're tackling that topic, at a variety of conversations locally and at the state level. But we don't have a lot of people who are also interested in substitute teaching. In the past, schools, I think, when we all went to school, if a teacher was absent, there was a substitute teacher who came in, and that's the way that, public education in the United States has operated for a very long time. But there are not very many subs right now. There are far more teacher absences on any given day, or staff absences, than there are substitutes. This has been a very, very difficult problem to solve at the national level. School districts across our country are trying to figure out solutions to this, and we have the same challenges here. What happens often in our schools, particularly our largest schools, is that there'll be a certain number of people who are absent. There is a staffing personnel to cover a fraction of those absences, and then the school staff are pulling people from other positions within the building to cover, either for an entire day or for a part of a day. And so those people then are not able to fulfill the responsibilities that they've been hired to do. And so the result of that has been really a fractured system. We are losing continuity of teaching and learning. Students are struggling. They kind of don't know whether they're going to have one person or who it's going to be. Students who require some supports and services sometimes aren't getting them. Students, whether that's academic, social, emotional, special ed, intervention. We find these moments where we're trying to make do, and that has been very challenging. And as I think about our system goals, it makes it really difficult for us to meet the needs of our students. So this fall we pulled together a group of people. I invited anyone in the supervisory union who's interested to come join a think tank. It was called the Substitute Think Tank, and it was, hey, let's come together, all of us, and throw ideas out and try to creatively come up with a solution. And we had a very diverse group of educators. And so we had teachers, we had support staff, we had people who'd been subs who are now subs, paras, teachers, we had principals, and we all worked together. And the result was us realizing that, every other business, entity, organization, there's not another system that relies on outside people who are not trained to come in and substitute, right? No other organization does that. And so we thought, hey, why don't we look at filling internally? If we can create systems where we aren't relying on outside people, but we have a system in our schools where there's like a pod of teachers, we bring in some extra people, and those people are now part of this team. This team is self-contained, and when somebody's out, this educational assistant is substituting in, supporting kids when they need it. If a unified arts teacher, like an art teacher or a music teacher, is out, this person would substitute for them for this team. So all of a sudden you have a group of people who all know these children very well. They all know the curriculum and programming that's in place. They know their structure, they know the routine, they've all got relationship with students. So when somebody's out, they can cover. And so we've included in the budget 9 of these educational assistant positions, 5 of whom are slated to go to Manchester Elementary Middle School, 4 of whom are slated to go to Floodbrook, because those are our largest schools where we have the biggest challenges. And they will each be assigned to a group of probably 4 to 5 teachers, and we are going to pilot this next year. in hopes that we build stability when students feel safe and they feel like they're in a predictable place and everything is flowing as it is. We see, increased learning, decreased behavior. It will provide continuity of learning and instruction for them. It will help us to achieve our academic goals, help our students to be more successful, our teachers to feel less stressed. So included in the budget are these positions for next year, and we're hopeful that that this idea has some real merit and we see the impact pretty quickly. So those, I would say, are the big items that are added or different in the budget now.
Well, that's quite a lot. My goodness. Well, Jim, let me turn to you. You've been on school boards for a long time. You've been the chair of the BRSU board, as well as a member of the Taconic and Green board. I guess what strikes you about the budgets that you're seeing this year that really stands out?
I think, from the board perspective, we discussed and what Randy's just given you is really fabulous, because it gives you an idea of what we're trying to do to respond, essentially to respond to a situation that as has been mentioned and as you asked about, kids are in a number of cases, we're needing to make sure that kids can catch up, that kids have supports, because they've been through a very difficult time. It's been difficult for the kids, for their families. It's also been very difficult for the people working in our system. And so, some of these supports, it's really from a board perspective, we looked at it and said, okay, we want to make sure that we are budgeting for the right resources to actually, overcome any difficulties that have been created through the past few years of the pandemic and all. And those impacts are felt at the student level, the family level, and our staff level. And so we wanted to make sure that we were doing the right things to ensure that, in the end, our schools are going to be operating well, and we're going to provide the right kind of resources to our kids to be able to, if they've fallen behind, let them catch up, to if they're having difficulty for any reason, to have the right resources for them to be able to be successful in school. And so we looked at that, but as a board, we also always have the view that we're here for the taxpayers, so we have to make sure that in the end we're doing it in as efficient a manner as we can. So we try to charge Randy with figuring out the way to make the schools work for our primary goal, which is educating kids. But try to keep her feet to the fire a little bit in terms of the money side. So when we looked at the budgets, there was a lot of discussion about every year we do have the discussion of the trend in the state of Vermont is education spending has been increasing, but the number of kids in the system has been decreasing. And it's a slow move. But we're always trying to make sure that we're trying to figure out the best way to do things as efficiently as possible. And so from our perspective, we looked at, and with this, what Randy was talking about with the new positions and everything else, we kind of like a lot of the taxpayers, we get to, okay, what's our bottom line? And on the bottom line basis, which Sue can give you a lot more details on, but we look at things. Education spending is a key figure, and that's the amount, essentially how much are we spending against how much we also have some revenues that come in, and the education spending is the net of that. And we're looking at accomplishing all this stuff with a 6% increase in education spending this year. And we thought, okay, that's probably reasonable. It also needs to be looked at in the context of, on a statewide basis, they're estimating that education spending will be going up 8.5%. So that made us feel a little bit more comfortable. At the same time, we're never all that comfortable with increases, and we have inflation, et cetera, but still 6% is a decent sized number. So we're always trying to figure out a way to manage that. But I think from a board perspective, we really looked at it as, is this what we need for our kids to be successful? And we came to the conclusion, yes. And are we doing it in as efficient a manner as we can expect, and I think, you know, the board came to a resounding yes as an answer to that. So that's from the board perspective. You know, we're trying to not be too much into the weeds or try to micromanage or anything. We're just trying to make sure that this makes sense and the taxpayers their money is being well spent on, you know, one of the most important things we do as a society, teaching our kids.
Absolutely. Well, Sue Wilborn, let's go to you and have you break down some of these numbers for us then. What is the exact increase in the two budgets, and how will that impact the tax rates that voters will be looking at town meeting?
Yeah, so we have a 7.9% increase in the voted budget itself. So we'll be asking the voters to approve that in one of the articles on the warning. And as Jim said, the impact of that is a 6% increase in education spending from last year. And so even with that increase, and our equalized pupils are going down a little bit, as Jim mentioned, we do have a slow rate of declining enrollment. Even with that count declining, we're still expecting a drop in the equalized tax rate. And that projection is based on the tax commissioner's recommendation of the property yield at 15,479, which is a big increase from last year. So the property yield typically goes up around 3% on an annual basis, but in the last 2 years, it's gone up significantly. So from last year to this year, it's a 16% increase in the property yield. So as the property yield goes up, the equalized tax rate goes down. And so we're expecting an almost 9-cent decrease in the equalized tax rate for Taconic and Green. So that's the tax rate that's based on the school budget. And what is the result of the formula calculation after we put our budget and our local revenues into to create an education spending figure. There's a second piece to that, which is what the actual tax rate will be on homeowners' tax bills, and that's the homestead tax rate, and that's done on a town-by-town basis. And that is where our equalized tax rate is adjusted for property valuation that may not be accurate in individual towns. And it's adjusted by what's called the common level of appraisal. And so this is part of the state formula, and it is again, based on a town-to-town basis, whether or not real estate property values are assessed as they should be, based on a state formula. So the tax rate can go up or down, depending on what that common level of appraisal is, turns out to be at the end of every year. And in what's happening statewide is property values are going up, we all know that, and that goes into this formula, and that means the assessed values of our homes probably aren't as high as they need to be at the town level when they're putting together their grand list. And so that means tax rates on a town-by-town basis will go up.
Yeah, we've been hearing an awful lot about the CLA and reappraisals and whatnot, and I gather one of the problems the towns are going to be having when they go through reappraisals is that there aren't enough reappraisers, qualified reappraisers in the state to make that happen.
Right.
Quickly, and that there will be a couple of years for some cases before that's done. But I want to try and understand a little bit more about how this common level of appraisal or CLA works, because that's a ratio between what the fair market value of a property versus what the town listers say it's worth.
Well, it's essentially it's a statistical study that they run for every town in the state of Vermont. It just came out recently. And it looks at what it's really measuring, yes, the assessed values. So each town, town assessors determine what a value of a property is. And then you have actual sales of properties, which, you take most of those actual sales and compare how much did it sell for versus what it was appraised for. And the CLA takes 3 years of that data and looks at, okay, were they selling for a lot more than they're appraised for or less than they're appraised for? And the tough thing we have is, the pandemic, again, that's using 3 years of data. And right now we have 2 years of data where real estate prices went insane. And so for most of our towns, sort of on average, the movement in the CLA for each of our towns was, on average about 10 points per year. So in a town like, I live in Dorset, and I'm on the select board there, and our CLA went basically from, a little over 100 to the next year a little over 90 to the next year a little over 80, which is so, came from being pretty close to being appraised right to being underappraised by 20%. That's huge, and when you have 3 years worth of data and 2 of those years are going like crazy, it really skews the heck out of things. And this is on a statewide basis, so essentially, pretty much on a statewide basis, we're seeing the education tax rates in districts, having a decline because of what Sue mentioned. But most of those towns are going to end up having a significant increase. And in our case, as Sue said, I mean, it's a significant decrease in our education tax rate, but our towns are going to have significant increases in the tax rate people are paying. And part of that, again, you have to recognize that's based on what they're saying is your properties are underappraised and you're paying your taxes on the basis of the appraised property. So you could say that this sort of evens out, but it doesn't even out when the tax bill that you get from the town is going to be significantly higher. It's going to hurt. And that's something that actually the legislature is looking at right now because it's not an easy solution to. There is no easy solution to the significant tax rate increases people are going to be seeing.
And I'm sorry, Sue.
I was just going to add on to that. For some people, because we also have income sensitivity
Right.
to throw in there.
Which is important.
And so, yeah, the next step of that is that, yes, you may see that larger increase on your tax bill, but if you're income sensitized, you are still going to be paying based on your income. You're not going to pay that whole
Right.
bill. So that significant increase that is an impact due to the CLA isn't necessarily going to affect a homeowner who's income sensitized. And a very large percentage of our population is income sensitized. I think statewide average is over 60%.
Statewide, it's almost 70%.
Yeah.
And it's good in that the people who are income sensitized end up being the people who can less afford to have
Right.
those big increases. So people who can more afford, the people who aren't income sensitized, that's because they're higher income people. They can probably handle the increase a little bit better. So its impact on locals, they really need to keep a focus on whether they're paying on the basis of the property.
On the tax rate.
Yeah.
And so they may see a larger tax on their bill, but they'll also see a larger credit. And so they're not going to see a large increase from year to year if they're income sensitized.
And what's the dividing line between how you qualify or not for income? Is it $50,000 a year in income? Or
Oh, no, it's
60?
much
It's
more than
higher.
that. It's over 100.
Over
Yeah,
100, okay.
yeah, or
And it's
around 100.
sliding, I
Yeah,
think.
there's a sliding scale when you get to a certain point. So off the top of my head, I don't have that number, but it's much higher than 50.
But I think
yeah.
it's close to like 110.
That's what
right
I was.
now.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
That you get some income
Still some credit. Yes.
sensitivity.
Clearly, I'm living in the past.
Based on household income too. Yeah.
You haven't asked the question in a while.
Well, Randy, I just want to get back to you before we have to run here and kind of look at what this budget will be financing and paying for. I mean, one of the things we've been hearing a lot about as we hopefully emerge out of the COVID pandemic era is the fact that some students have really struggled through this period. And a lot of them haven't really worked well with online learning or whatever, but we're hopefully at a point where we're kind of back to something more normal. But are a lot of students struggling with getting to grade level? I mean, I've been hearing a lot about that nationally anyway, that across the country a lot of students in 4th or 5th grades or at 3rd grade level in math, let's say. Is that your sense of things here, or are we kind of roughly on grade level, or at least within a point where they can catch up fairly quickly?
So there's 2 questions, I think, in what you're asking.
Probably 4 or 5.
Maybe. I'll narrow it down to 2. First is, are we seeing post-pandemic impact?
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, our performance is fairly aligned to national norms pre-pandemic. We're using a new system of assessing our students and looking at their growth. So we don't have pre-pandemic data on our students on this measure, but when we compare our current performance to the national pre-pandemic, we are right average. So We see our students responding, we see them growing. We did a good job of continuity of programming where, you know, you hear about districts that were remote for really extended periods of time, a year and a half, 2 years in some cases. That was not our experience. So we are learning, we're growing, we're adjusting. We have many students who are not meeting grade level standards. That was true before the pandemic, that's true now. What we didn't talk about, because it's not really included in the budget, but I think is relevant to your question, we used ESSER funds, ARP ESSER funds. Those are federal COVID relief funds given to school districts to really review, analyze our math and reading and writing curriculums. And we adopted a new math curriculum this year that has much greater rigor and provides a lot of differentiation for our students, so that there's different levels of sort of practice for students to still reach the same grade level standards. So we're implementing that, and we have a language arts curriculum review that's happening right now. So our reading and writing curriculum will be new next year as well. So we've been adjusting curriculum and programming. As you know, we're having some additional staff in place. So, you know, we are not doing as well as we'd like to do, and we are taking the steps that we believe will yield to more students making more progress in our schools. So I feel good about the work we're doing, and I look forward to seeing how our students grow over the next couple of years.
Andrew, I had one more thing that I just want, since this is a discussion of budget, I wanted everybody to be aware that these guys do, especially Sue and support people, do a phenomenal job of putting together a lot of explanation of our budget in the annual report. There's a lot of Q&A. You know, if you have a question, it's probably in there with a really, you know, detailed, good explanation, because you can't, you know, just discussing for a short period of time, you can't get into all that nitty-gritty, but it's there for people. And I think, you know, I'm really proud of the fact that we, for all of our districts, we put together such a good package to if people want to understand the budget, it's there for them. And I just encourage everybody to take a look and, you know, get into the detail as much as you can stand. So, you know, because it's there.
Copies of that booklet at the town offices of all the towns, at BRSU schools. It's available online. So there's multiple places, and you could always contact the BRSU office, and we can get you people a copy.
And it's not ready yet. It'll be
No,
out.
yeah, it's
It'll
not
be out in
ready.
a couple of
We haven't
weeks.
finished
Don't go
reading
looking for it yet.
But
Mid-February.
But if you know, have one left over from last year, then those
You can
explanations
get an idea
are phenomenal.
of what, yeah.
It is really valuable, and I don't see many other districts providing that level of information on the budget. So it is something I'm proud of for our districts.
And voters will also be able to go to an annual meeting, right, of the Taconic and Green. That'll be held February 28th at 7 p.m. up at the Courier School in Danby, I believe, right? Is that correct?
Yep. And, you know, that's going to be largely an informational meeting, because you know, things get voted on, you know, basically by us, you know, Australian ballot. But we're going to have an in-person meeting, but it's going to have, you know, people have access to that meeting remotely, and I think we're, you know, hoping to make it a good informational session.
All right. Well, we'll have to leave it there for today. I'm sure we could talk for another half an hour easily about the ins and outs of the budget and what else is going on educationally, but we'll leave it there for now. And again, want to thank Jim Salsgiver, Susan Wilborn, Dr. Randi Lowe for being with us to kind of walk us through some of the ins and outs of this. It'll be fascinating reading to kind of check that all out. And also to thank you for being with us today. I hope you found our program interesting, and well, we will see you again the next time. Meanwhile, have a great day. Thank you.